Hello and welcome to the 2021 Freedom of Information Oklahoma Annual Awards Ceremony. My name is Andy Moore. I'm the Executive Director of FOI Oklahoma, and I'm joined by our current Board President, Ted Struley. Good evening, sir.
Hi, Andy, and hello to everyone watching at home.
Obviously, this event, like everything else in life, has been disrupted by COVID. We appreciate your willingness to join us whenever and wherever you are right now while you're watching this. We have some excellent guest speakers tonight, and of course, we'll be honoring our 2021 award winners. I, for one, am very excited. Ted, I even wore a suit tonight.
I know, and I thank you for making me wear a suit for the fourth time since the pandemic started. We're going to begin tonight's program with an intimate discussion about the First Amendment, the freedom of the press, and why government transparency is more important today than ever before.
Hello, my name is Ray Rivera, Executive Editor of The Oklahoman. Welcome to Freedom of Information Oklahoma's annual award ceremony, and congratulations to all of this year's winners. There is perhaps no more important tool for holding local, state, and federal officials accountable than the Freedom of Information Act. Unfortunately, state laws vary widely across the country, and enforcement and compliance is an issue at both the state and federal levels. Today, we have a distinguished panel to talk about our state's law, the Oklahoma Open Records Act, and how effective it is for the journalists who put it to use every day. With us to discuss this is my Oklahoma colleague, longtime investigative reporter and Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame member, Nolan Clay. Also with us is Mark Thomas, Executive Vice President of the Oklahoma Press Association, who works on all legislation related to open meetings and open records on behalf of Oklahoma's news organizations. And finally, we have Dana Hernecki, a television reporter and anchor with more than 30 years with nearly 30 years experience, including the last 11 with Channel 9, who's also working now on special projects for the news organization. Before we begin, I'd like to also extend a big thank you to Todd Spessard, Nathan Elliott, and everyone here at Channel 9 for helping us to produce this segment today. Panel, thank you for being with us here today.
Yeah.
Nolan, I'd like to start with a really broad question, and Mark and Dana, feel free to jump in. Does the Oklahoma Open Records Act work on a practical level, and how effective is it for you as a journalist who uses it on a regular basis?
No, it doesn't work. In fact, I don't use it as much as I should. I just prefer to try to get it from sources, because the people who respond to the Open Records Act and the different agencies and government entities, they're overwhelmed, and they don't get the resources they need, and they don't really have sometimes the education that they need to do it. They don't know the Open Records Act like they should, and they get all kinds of requests from everybody. And with the internet, there's all kinds of organizations that can make requests, sometimes too broad. And these directors of communication who also have to deal with the media, they're overwhelmed. Agencies are not willing to give enough resources to respond. The Ethics Commission offered to be kind of a central clearinghouse, and the legislature just poo-pooed that. And it takes months sometimes to get responses.
Dana, I want to put that same question to you. Is television journalists have an accelerated clock often in how they have to produce stories, especially at an in-depth level. How effective has it been for you?
Well, probably.
And for your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, obviously getting something for an open records request on a deadline for us is probably, that's hardly ever happens. Unless it's like a police department or a law enforcement source, but it's very rare that we can get something within, the day or whatever. But I probably have a little bit better luck than Nolan, and maybe just because we're asking for different things, obviously. But we have, most of the time, I would say within maybe a couple months that we will have, and that's we will get something back. I've noticed a couple times that we haven't. I kind of went back and looked before preparing for this of the times that I haven't gotten anything back, and maybe a handful of times, in the past 5 years that we have gotten nothing back. But I would agree with what Nolan says. It's just there's no resources, or there are very few resources if you send it to the public relations person, and then they have to, a lot of times have an attorney look it over or redact it or whatever, and so it can take a long time. So unless you have several, weeks or even a month or several months, I think it takes a while for sure.
There was a highly publicized shooting at Louis here in Oklahoma City, and the gunman was killed by two good Samaritans who jumped in. I asked pretty quickly for the police body cams, and the shooting was in May 24th. I didn't get it till September. Heck, by that time, most people had forgotten about it. And I mean, it made a hell of a story, but took so long to get and because they had to digitize out every view of the dead body and go through it. It just took forever.
Mark, you have followed the evolution of the act here in Oklahoma probably more closely than anyone, perhaps, over the last many years. What's the strongest part of the act, or its greatest strength? And conversely, what's its greatest weakness, in your view?
I think there probably are two strongest points. One, it starts from the premise that all records are open unless a law closes them down. That puts the onus on the government bodies to come in and make their case to close a record. The second part is, in Oklahoma, unlike some other states, not only is it a criminal penalty, it's a crime, not only a fine and a jail term, but you can also get your attorney's fees back. So those were two critical pieces of the framework or the structure when they were putting it together back in 1983, 84. And I come at it from a more historical perspective than the journalist perspective, in that the Open Records Act used to be this long. It was 2 paragraphs, and it said, and you can't get anything from the tax commission. That was it. It said records are open, but you can't get anything from the tax commission. And we had the Moore Police Records case, which was taken on by OPUBCO and the Oklahoma Press Association and others, that basically the Supreme Court said, yes, you've got an Open Records Act, but it doesn't mean anything because you have to go down section by section by section and say what's open and what's closed. So that started the process of saying, okay, we need to expand, starting from the premise that everything's open and it's a crime if you deny it. Now, there are a lot of variations in that and how that really works, or does that work at all, but those were 2 important pieces when it started. On the flip side, at the time, Florida had really the strongest sunshine law in the United States, and their standard for access to records was called the prompt and reasonable standard. We used to live in a world where we thought reasonable people could agree on what reasonable access was. I'm not sure we live in that world anymore. And so Oklahoma adopted the prompt reasonable standard that Florida had, but that's become increasingly problematic because a lot of state agencies or local officials, they've kind of gotten into the public relations business. They're a little more worried about the image of their agency or their town than they are about providing access to records. So they spend all their time having their public information officer review everything and figuring out how this is going to be played in the media, and having their attorney look at it over and over for months at a time. That delays access to not only the journalists but to citizens in general, and that's a problem.
We've seen in several states where, and at the federal level, where, and you allude to this a little bit, where compliance with the act has also become a political process, where the request goes all the way up to the executive or the head of the agency, who then might review it for political ramifications or what have you. Has that been a problem here in Oklahoma? And I'll open that up to anyone.
Absolutely, it's a problem.
Well, one time we asked the insurance commissioner or his office for any of his emails, because he was accused of accepting bribes of Carol Fisher and campaign corruption, and we kept getting responses back that there was nothing to our request. There were no records that were available. And then he quit, and we asked for every email that he had ever sent or received. And back then there wasn't as many emails as there are today. And there were plenty of emails that would have been responsive to our request. But he was the one who made the final decision. He was under investigation, and he didn't want this stuff out, so he just didn't release it.
You mentioned that as part of the enforcement mechanism that there is a criminal penalty for non-compliance. Has anybody ever been, in your knowledge, been held criminally liable?
They have been.
charged?
They have been. It's been quite a few years. We've had people charged and go to jail out in eastern Oklahoma. But it's more common that you would sue for the records and they would give them up and say we didn't realize we weren't complying with the law. That's just a misunderstanding or no understanding of the law. We didn't realize we were not complying, so here they are. They'll give them to you just before they're about to be criminally charged.
Yeah. And Dana, you and I talked about this the other day. In order to enforce a public records request, your only real recourse is to go to court.
Right.
What does that do for a news organization in making those kinds of decisions, whether you're going to bring your attorneys in and take it to court? This is a costly proposition.
Right, yeah, like if we don't get something, if I don't get a records request or it's taking too long, because really there's no deadline, right? Yeah, not that I know of, there's no real deadline, so they're like, if it's taking too long, then I have to go to my boss and say, hey, do we want to spend money on an attorney to fight this? And then he or she has to make a decision. Do we want to do that? Do we want to, get in the middle of this, or is it even worth it? And we move on. And I think that's probably a lot of times what open records, custodians are counting on, is that you'll just forget about it or you won't fight it, and then they don't have to give up the records that they know shows probably something, shady was going on.
Well, to add to that, when we have to sue, we're paying our attorneys. We're also paying their attorneys. To keep the records secret are being paid by the taxpayers as well. So we're paying for attorneys for both sides. So when we win and get our money back, we're really just getting our money, not money. There's really no punishment for the government agency to lose the case other than they have to give up the records.
Mark, in Washington State, where I came from most recently, the Seattle Times, they have punitive damages for noncompliance. So you can win your attorney's fees and win damages for every day. In their law, it's $100 for every day that a record is not provided within the statutory framework. And there they have specific deadlines, although there is a lot of squishy room depending on the complexity of the request. That really, from a newspaper perspective, that was really helpful for us. We were able to win settlements of well over $100,000 over just the last couple of years, just on punitive damages. Has there been any push? Oklahoma has no such punitive damages. Right. Has there been any push to either add punitive damages or create more teeth to ensure compliance within a timely manner?
I don't know that there's been any push to add punitive damages. It is an expanding and a contracting set of laws. Something will happen and all of a sudden body cams will become more available more quickly. Something else will happen and they'll start to be delayed, or records will come open and closed a little faster based on circumstances that happen that affect the legislature. So if the legislature felt punitive damages were in order to make political subdivisions and state agencies comply, all you've got to have is 51 votes in the House, 26 in the Senate, and one governor's signature, and you can have a law.
And how receptive has the legislature been to transparency? We often get a lot of pro-transparency kind of talk until it comes time to make that vote.
Everyone's in favor of transparency, but is the operative word. But in this case, we need to close this record. But for this, we shouldn't open this. So they're all for it in general terms.
They exempt themselves.
But in specific terms, there's always some exception. And on the self-exemption, I mean, when the law was going through in 84, 85, I mean, the Constitution says the legislature sets its own rules. It says it makes its own rules. So So, and the same thing with the judiciary. The judiciary is exempt from the Open Records Act because the Constitution says the judiciary sets their own rules. So we didn't want to put something in there that says the legislature is subject to this act as a body when the Constitution says the House sets its rules, the Senate sets its rules. And then have parts of the act knocked out as unconstitutional. We rail all the time about them passing unconstitutional laws. We didn't want to be the sponsor of one. So I think the House and Senate set their own rules. The House can be as open as it wants to be, and the Senate can be as open as it wants to be without the other body having to agree. So they, over time, have gotten more and more transparent in the way that they do things. There's still a long way to go, but they weren't included originally because we felt it would be unconstitutional under Article 5 of the Constitution. That's why they're exempted, just like the judiciary.
Nolan, I'm going to come to you at this next question, and then Dana, I'd like you to jump in as well from a different kind of news organization perspective. As newspapers have lost circulation over the last several years, especially since 2008, have struggled. Have you seen an erosion in compliance with the Open Records Act, with agencies being a little more bold and saying, oh, we don't really have to comply, they're probably not going to fight too vigorously?
They don't fear us as much, no, because we don't have the statewide coverage that we used to. But I mean, we've been negative a lot here. The best stories I've ever done at the paper have been from records. We had an execution yesterday. The last execution before that was called off. And as we tried to figure out all the reasons it was called off, we checked the previous execution that had been carried and figured out that they probably used the wrong drug in that execution. And the way we proved that was from the autopsy report, which was subject to the open records. We made an email request for it. It came in, we had our big scoop. They used the wrong drug in the last execution in Oklahoma before yesterday's.
So as much as we're grousing about agencies not complying and there not being good enforcement, it still does prove effective at times.
It does, and courts have gotten more transparent. The court records are easier to get, they're online. Federal and state, you can get online and not have to. I used to, boy, when I started in the 80s, I would have to travel all over the place, the courthouse, And now you just look it up online, and most places, it'll be right there. And other times the court clerk will email it to you if you need to. So courts have gotten more transparent.
And let's come back to the online component of that in a second. Dana, I want to bring that same question to you from a broadcast perspective. Have you seen an erosion of compliance among agencies as news organizations in general have gotten a little weaker, but broadcast has remained pretty strong?
I wouldn't say so. I don't think that there has really been an erosion. I think it's about the same as it has been since I started in this business. Not quite 30 years ago.
Okay. I think I got that wrong. Nearly 30 years, right?
But no, I don't. No, I wouldn't say so. I would say almost like the technology has made it easier. Like he says, online stuff, or sometimes you don't even have to fill out a form. You can just call somebody and send them an email, and they'll be like, yeah. And they'll just send it right back, and it's easy that way. You don't have to mail the form and all of that. So I think technology has really made it easier, and I haven't really noticed that we don't get as much access as before. And probably the technology has made it easier as far as filling those requests. It's they just have to pull up a form. They don't have to go through the file cabinets and everything. They can just find it, what they need, and then digitally send it to us. And I think it makes it faster, honestly.
Do you have an example where an Open Records Act has really opened up a story for you or led to a great story, or in the reverse, where it's just created an incredible frustration in terms of reporting?
Well, no, I had a good one. I did a DHS story. This was several years ago, and we had a big Open Records request, and they were kind of tricky about it. They sent me like a big file like this, like all this paper, and just made it really, really small, so I couldn't look at it. And then I asked for it digitally, and so then I could, search it and everything, and they did comply. But yeah, it was a story about some caseworkers who said that the DHS was altering the numbers on how many cases people were, caseworkers were fulfilling or working on to fulfill the mandate of a federal lawsuit. And so they did give us all those papers that they were supposed to, and they did fulfill the request pretty quickly in time for our story. But like I said, they did put it really small like that, so I was like, yeah.
Well, and that technology has made it easier, certainly, to see things in the courts and to request records. But I think for the custodian, it's made it easier for them to comply in certain cases. But when they get these massive requests for 20 years worth of something, they're paralyzed. And so I always tell people, you need to be a little more moderate, a little more reasonable in your request. In fact, dole it out a little bit. Ask for a year of this and a year of that. Don't ask for 50 years worth of records digitally. That's going to take them a while to put that together. And remember, they're going to do it. It's a crime not to, but it may take them a long time. And we have worked, by the way, to try and do things in the statute. For example, on the prompt or reasonable standard, we have changed the law now to say, if you put records on your website that are available for free people to see and download and have access to freely, you are not subject to you can't be sued for not having prompt, reasonable access. So that's almost an incentive for them to put things online. You can't be sued if you'll make it easily available.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. Some states have been really good, and I'm not going to, in making sure more and more records are put online, especially data and things like that have really made it easier for journalists and for compliance officers to respond to requests or even have to fill fewer requests. How is Oklahoma doing in that regard?
Well, I mean, there are examples of the Ethics Commission, for instance. Again, back in the 80s, you'd have to go to the basement of the Capitol to flip through campaign reports. And if you're in Tulsa or Broken Arrow or Broken Bow, that was a long drive. Now, you don't even have to make an open records request. It's right there. You get on the Guardian system and you can look up anything you need and who's giving to who, how much they've raised, and lots of great stories from there.
And I think another thing we've done just in the last couple of years is we had confusion with records custodians where they didn't know they would have a small request and a big request. So they would just make a checklist, make a list and say, we're fulfilling record request number 1 first, record request number 2 second, and so forth. That became problematic because we felt like some people were having their friend come in and make a massive request was request number 1, and that slowed down request number 2, which might be a single page, but it might take me a year to get it because they're still working on request number 1. So the legislature said, yes, that's not right. Senator Thompson and some others said, that's not right. They need to fulfill requests. They can't hide one request behind another. They need to work on them all simultaneously and fulfill these requests. So we've been working on things like that to make them more accessible as well.
Mark, I'm going to come to you with this question, but I'm going to follow up with the same question to Nolan, Dana, just to give you a second to think about this. What's at the top of your wish list? If you could change one thing right now, legislature is going to pass it. What is that to strengthen the Open Records Act?
I think it would have to be some sort of a time standard. And that prompt and reasonable just doesn't work anymore. Some sort of time standard. And a close second, I think, would be some sort of public records advocate that you could take your complaint to, who could make an easy decision, an easy and quick decision about whether the records are open or closed, and assist the agency in, or the city council, school board, whoever it is, could make those kind of decisions. Those would be two things at the very top.
On an advisory level or with actual enforcement power?
I think probably with actual enforcement power. Now, where do you put that has been where we've tried to put it. Do you put it in the Ethics Commission? Do you put it in the Attorney General's office offered to do it, but they advise a lot of state agencies. So there's been talk about the state auditor's office. There's been lots of different things talked about. So we're trying to figure out how that would work.
Dana, your wish list?
Absolutely a deadline. Yeah, I think we talked about this. We've been waiting from OU for 2 years for records request, and so probably the same ones you guys have been waiting for. But yeah, I mean, if there was some sort of deadline, and then if there, like you mentioned, some sort of punitive after they're past that deadline, you would think that that would be some sort of incentive to fill those instead of just like, oh well, we're still working on it. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources. And 2 years down the line, really, for the story-wise, a lot of times people don't care and they hope we forget or that we don't sue them, and it's just basically a waiting game, and they can play it.
State agencies, the bigger ones, hire somebody, but that's their primary function is to respond to open records requests rather than their secondary or third function.
So having more resources to respond to requests, having
Yeah,
agencies get
yeah.
more resources.
Exactly. Department of Human Services, I've gotten great stories. I ask for their disciplinary records every year. In January, I usually don't get them until April or May. I mean, if they had somebody focused on that, I should be able to get that stuff in 2 weeks.
Mark, when does criminality get involved? I mean, how do you go about letting law enforcement, and who is it? Is it the district attorney? Is it the attorney general? Who is it that would enforce these laws, and how would you attract their attention?
Well, in the old days, it used to just be the district attorney, and you had to beg the district attorney to sue their fellow elected officials, and that was pretty rare back in the day. It's happened more recently, but it was pretty rare for the district attorney to do it, and that's why that changed. Said any person can file an action and sue, and if it's a willful violation, it could the court could come and have some sort of criminal punishment, but generally they just say, yes, it's a willful violation, you win, you get the records, and you get your attorney's fees back. So the courts aren't handing out crimes. It's generally got to be the district attorney.
Right, because you're
kind of
filing
power.
in civil court. You're
Correct.
suing in civil court, so I'm not sure how they would then have that.
It kind of depends on the nature of the outcome of the civil case. If it was clearly determined that something criminal happened, a criminal case could be filed.
When was the last time, Dana and Nolan, that you can recall, or have you gone to court for records?
We asked a judge to unseal a divorce case on a mayoral candidate, and he went to the Supreme Court, and basically we got a ruling that said the court records like that should be open, but we had to use an attorney to ask the judge and not just say, hey judge, can you open it up? But we went to court because he went to court and spent a lot of money, but got the records.
Do you recall if you got your attorney's fees back?
No, we didn't get we just paid them.
You just paid them. Okay.
I couldn't tell you honestly. Yeah, when the last time was that we went to court.
It's a
I
really
don't know which one you're talking about, but I don't know.
But I do think it's telling that the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press got a $10 million grant from the Knight Foundation to pay for attorneys to sue people for violations of the Open Records Act in 5 different jurisdictions, 5 states. And they received applications from 45 states, and Oklahoma was one of the 5 that was selected. If
Is that right?
If that tells you that the level of non-compliance in this state is pretty high, that the Washington, D.C. based Reporters Committee would look at us, at all of the applications, and say, we need a full-time attorney in Oklahoma for 2 years, fully paid, to do nothing but sue people for violating the Open Records Act. So I think they're involved in 5 or 6 cases now about body cams, emails of public officials, reports from the university regents from the University of Oklahoma, and so forth. So they're, how many of, I think we're involved in, with the Reporters RCFP grant money, we're involved in at least 5 or 6 right now.
So for the journalists in our organization, especially the younger journalists, how do they take advantage of that?
Our CFP has a hotline, and you call and tell them the specifics of your case, and they talk to their attorneys in Washington, and then if they feel it's warranted, they will start filing an action immediately.
Okay, well, that's really good information to have. In our closing minute, we're winding down on time. Again, for the benefit of the younger journalists in our audience, what advice would you have for them in terms of using the Open Records Act? And I'll come to Dana next on that.
Well, I always, one of my colleagues would say the story's in the street, and I would always say the story's in the records. And there are records to be found that can help you make a story that much better. Make sure you got the name spelled right too. So don't ignore records, go for them all the time.
Great. Dana, any advice?
Well, the information is a lot of times there, and a lot of times you just have to ask for it. You know, we talk a lot about they won't give you access, but I feel like overwhelmingly, at least in our case, they do give us what we want. If it's a body cam, if it's court records, whatever, but at least ask for it and then go from there.
It's one of the things I often see from young journalists and even more experienced journalists who have become a little inured to the whole process of throwing up their hands right off the bat saying, well, they're never going to give us this. The advice I'm hearing from both of you is you're not going to get it if you don't ask,
Yeah.
right?
It's intimidating. It's an intimidating process for sure, especially when you have to fill out the form and everything like that. But yeah, a lot of times you're like, if they're doing something shady, they're not going to put it in there. But you know, experience has shown that a lot of times they will. They have to.
Okay, Mark, you look like you want a parting shot.
My final parting shot, I think, is we spend a lot of time thinking about Open Meetings Act and worrying about meetings and how meetings and the agendas and how they're structured. But records are the thing that's going to outlive all of us. The records will be there 50 years from now after we're all gone. They are much more important. The Open Meetings Act is important in how we conduct business as a self-governing people. But records are going to outlive all of us. And so they're important that things are recorded so we can learn from our past mistakes on how we govern ourselves. If we don't make those records available or we hide them or we destroy them, we'll never learn, we'll never get better at governing ourselves if we don't maintain the right records and refer to those records and use them to improve our self-government.
Well, great. Thank you to all of you for being with us
you.
today. And again, congratulations to all the winners. Again, there's nothing more important to holding officials accountable than seeking those records, making sure you know the Open Meetings Act and when it's being violated. And we wish you all the best. And thank you very much for being with us today.
A huge thank you to Ray for allowing us to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. And a special thanks to News 9 for assistance with the studio and filming. We are now going to begin the presentation of our annual awards. Please feel free to hoop, holler, and cheer at home, or in the case of the Black Hole Award, give out a great big womp womp.
Our first award is the Marion Opala First Amendment Award. Named for the late State Supreme Court Justice Marion Opala, this award recognizes individuals who have promoted education and protection of the individual rights guaranteed by the First Amendment. This year, the award goes to Michael Salem.
Michael's nomination letter stated, Michael has long been recognized as a fierce advocate for the First Amendment. He has never shied away from controversial causes as he has advocated for those whose First Amendment freedoms were being trampled. His successes in the courtroom are taught in our law schools, and Michael himself has taught many continuing legal education courses on the First Amendment and constitutional law in general. Along the way, he has won many awards, but he has yet to be recognized by Freedom of Information Oklahoma. I think it's time to honor Michael Salem for his lifetime of advocacy, education, passion, and inspiration. Congratulations, Michael. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's really an unexpected honor to accept the Marion Opala First Amendment Award. For the last 45 years, I've been very fortunate to be involved in many First Amendment cases and other cases under the Bill of Rights. In fact, if you go to the website of my law firm, it says the Bill of Rights is our client. But the preceding phrase in the name of the award is Justice Marion Opalo, and it's an even greater honor to receive an award named after him. He was a friend of mine and a man I greatly admired. His dedication to the rule of law and the Constitution was a cornerstone of his legal and career and his life. One that many lawyers and other people should truly emulate. I was one of those fortunate people who had the opportunity to eat lunch perhaps a half a dozen times at the Lido restaurant, which was a place that he frequented. For such a casual comment about lunch, lunch with Justice Opalo wasn't really particularly an easy feat. You see, he was a regular at the Lido. He had his own table. There was generally reserved for him and his guest. If you wanted a scheduled lunch with him, it was wise to give some lead time, more than 2 or 3 weeks perhaps. That's because he was typically booked up more than a month in advance. You want tickets to Hamilton? That was easy compared to a golden ticket for lunch with Justice Opalo. Usually I was there in the presence of others, but once it was just the two of us. And I'm a lawyer, and I asked questions, and he answered questions about the time before he came to the United States. And it was during that conversation it occurred to me that the primary source of his respect and devotion for the Constitution and the First Amendment was his description of his wartime experience living in an authoritarian regime and his eventual membership in the Polish underground. I believe it was from that experience came his commitment to the Constitution, but it was a commitment that also came with a responsibility, and that was his indefatigable effort at civic education, whether it was teaching at law schools, giving CLE presentations to lawyers, or speaking to innumerable public talks at organizations such as FIO Oklahoma. With the recent concerns about social media, I have been thinking a lot about the First Amendment, especially when I hear remedies that are being driven by government. Those are always concerning. I'll candidly admit that the concern is whether the First Amendment has met its match in social media's marketplace of ideas. This was identified by Justice Holmes in his dissent in Abrams versus United States, when Holmes said, "The best test of the truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market." It seems to me that there's a lot of rotten fruits and vegetables in the market these days, and we always thought that the counter speech doctrine, that is the solution to bad speech, was more speech. Justice Brandeis identified in Whitney versus California. He said, if there be a time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies, to avert the evil by the processes of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. So will this work? Justice Opalo thought so, and that's why he dedicated himself to Brandeis's processes of education, to promote civic education along with others such as Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And they should not be alone. We each have a responsibility to join in that effort and to promote civic education about government. And each of us should join together to make the Bill of Rights our clients, as Justice Opalo did. As difficult as it may appear at this time, given the foibles of human nature to believe falsehoods, we also need to promote civil discourse with this civic education, because if we do not, we have clear lessons from history that demonstrate that democratic majorities will embrace and have embraced authoritarianism. And unless we do our part, they may again. Thank you again, FOI Oklahoma, and thank you to Justice Opalo for the example that he has set as a civic educator. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Also, on behalf of FOI Oklahoma, we want to give an honorable mention to attorneys Megan Lambert at the ACLU of Oklahoma and Catherine Gardner with the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press. As we've seen an increasing number of government entities willing to test the limits of the law or eschew it entirely when it comes to transparency, increasingly we are turning to attorneys like Michael, like Catherine, like Megan, to ensure that these public entities are held to account and that the public is allowed to have the oversight and the transparency that we rightly deserve under the law.
Up next is the Ben Blackstock Award. This award is named for the former Oklahoma Press Association Executive Director, Ben Blackstock, and it recognizes a non-governmental person or organization that has shown a commitment to freedom of information. The Ben Blackstock Award for 2021 goes to State Impact Oklahoma education reporter Robbie Korth.
Robbie's nomination letter stated, Robbie recently received the Carter Bradley First Amendment Award presented by the Oklahoma Pro Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and he was honored for serving the public and First Amendment for developing and maintaining the State Impact Oklahoma COVID in Schools case tracker. During 2020, Robbie maintained regular communication with school administrators to learn the number of cases of COVID-19 for school districts across the state. He saw the need for the tracker because the state of Oklahoma was not keeping such records. Through his determined reporting and information gathering, the COVID-19 tracker was available and used as an important resource to aid schools, administrators, parents, and policymakers in determining the extent of infections in Oklahoma schools and the necessary response to keep students, teachers, and staff safe. Robbie was expecting to only do a COVID in Schools tracker last year in 2020, but due to the Delta variant threat, he is maintaining a new tracker in 2021 to monitor school closures due to the coronavirus. Congratulations, Robbie. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Thank you. It's such an honor to receive the Ben Blackstock Award, and thank you to Freedom of Information Oklahoma for presenting me with this award. First, I'd like to thank Dick Pryor at KGOU for his kind words in my nomination letter. I'd like to thank KOSU's Rachel Hubbard for her support, and State Impact Managing Editor Logan Layden for all his support in maintaining this tracker. It was a lot of work, and there was a lot of great work done by Oklahoma journalists as a part of there was a lot of great work by Oklahoma journalists done as a part of covering the coronavirus. So to be recognized for this kind of writing is just such an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Our next award is the Bickham Hale Award, which is named after FOI Oklahoma founder Sue Hale and our first executive director, Kay Bickham. The award is given to a volunteer, staff, or board member who has provided outstanding service to FOI Oklahoma. The Bickham Hale Award for 2021 is given to our own executive director, Andy Moore. Andy's letter of nomination from Joe Height stated, Andy Moore has advanced FOI Oklahoma in many ways as executive director, including a redesigned website and many educational opportunities. I'm nominating him for the Bickham Hale Service Award because of that work and his integrity in working with us in pursuit of our mission. It would serve to honor our outgoing executive director for reigniting and re-engaging FOI Oklahoma and its board. His tireless efforts have served to advance the efforts of our noble cause. Congratulations, Andy. Would you like to say a few words?
Thanks, Ted. I'm shocked. I am so appreciative to the board of FOI, all of our supporters, and the thousands of people around the state who hold transparency in the First Amendment to be of the utmost importance and recognize its impact on our daily lives. It's truly been an honor to serve as executive director of FOI Oklahoma for these 3.5 years, and I look forward to still working with the organization and supporting as a volunteer moving forward. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Andy. Our next award is the Sunshine Award. This award recognizes a public official or governmental body that has shown a commitment to freedom of information. And this year, it goes to Brittany Coley-Roberts from the Office of Management and Enterprise Services.
Brittany's nomination letter from her manager stated, as of November 2020, OMES maintained a backlog of over 100 open records requests dating back nearly 2 years. Leadership hired Brittany Coley-Roberts to address these cases and create a new tracking system to encourage more transparency, efficiency, and accountability. With a considerable amount of teamwork, she eliminated the backlog in a matter of months. Brittany worked long hours with dozens of colleagues to streamline our processes. As her manager, I continually witnessed her profound customer service and dedication to serving the people of Oklahoma. OMES receives hundreds of requests every year, mostly related to state financials, contracts, and employee emails. Because of the size and scope of these requests, we needed someone who acted with urgency and great skill. We found that in Brittany. Brittany's now designing a web portal to enhance customer service even further. We want citizens to reach us easily and with a few clicks of their keyboards. OMES is thankful for leaders like Brittany. Without her, we would not have come this far. Congratulations, Brittany. Would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking my OMES legislative and public affairs team that nominated me. I'm honored and grateful to receive this award as reassurance to keep doing the difficult behind-the-scenes work to make sure state government is more transparent to the public, and also to communicate on a more personal level with requesters, helping them navigate to the services and records they're seeking. At times, it can be a challenge to balance adhering to state and federal guidelines that protect personal and or external data, which is not always subject for public release under the Open Records Act or by OMES directly due to ownership. I think it is assumed at times that state agencies have a lot of their requested records readily available for release and just choose to withhold it. In reality, there's a process we follow to prepare and protect sensitive information that does not belong with the public, while rushing to provide access to the information that does. At several state agencies, there is still progress to be made with technology and tracking these requests, alongside the priority of improving the main function of the agency. At OMES, we are still working diligently to implement improvements internally to allow for better public service. But this award is a testament to the change of culture within OMES to prioritize transparency alongside other goals. It speaks to the progress we're making as an agency that not only serves the general public, but also serves other state agencies. I want to give credit to the OMES Central Purchasing Team. They hold the majority of our volume with commercial requests. I also want to give credit to OMES Information Services. They help us with any requests seeking electronically stored information, such as emails. If it weren't for such dedicated public servants being flexible and working with me, it wouldn't have been possible to remove the backlog. When I started with OMES in 2019, we set out on an agency-wide mission to implement a new streamlined process and online form to better track metrics. This allowed us the ability to dig deep and find out what barriers existed and what prevented us from fulfilling open records requests in a timely manner. We did our best to not let COVID-19 deter this effort, and moving things online seemed to work out just at the right time to allow us to continue this work. I wish I could name drop all the incredible staff behind the scenes, but I'll just end in saying I have the privilege in working with some of the most wonderful people. At the end of the day, we all have the same goal of serving Oklahomans in the way that we want to be served as citizens, while maintaining our normal full-time jobs to get stuff done. Thank you sincerely for the recognition, and I hope we continue to make you proud.
And last but not least, it is our custom to also recognize the individual, agency, or organization that has most thwarted the free flow of information during the past year. This year, our Black Hole Award is awarded to the University of Oklahoma and the Oklahoma State Department of Health. The University of Oklahoma has failed to provide prompt access to public records under the Oklahoma Open Records Act. Local news outlets, including OU's own student newspaper, the OU Daily, have reported waiting more than a year for the university to fill records requests. The University of Oklahoma Board of Regents also continues to suppress 2 investigative reports on alleged sexual misconduct by former school president David Boren and problems with the school's financial reporting. OU paid the law firm Jones Day more than $1 million for the investigations, and the Board of Regents has continued to fight the release of the reports even after the local news outlet Nondoc filed an open records lawsuit in June. Additionally, the Oklahoma State Department of Health stopped releasing daily data on hospital bed capacity in the state in May 2021. The agency only began reporting the numbers again in August as a new surge of COVID-19 hit the state and hospital leaders began speaking out about shortages of beds and staff that resulted in sick Oklahomans being transferred out of state for care. The Oklahoma State Department of Health has also failed to provide journalists with prompt access to public records under the Oklahoma Open Records Act. Oklahoma journalists have reported waiting nearly a year to receive records from the agency, including inspection reports, contracts, and emails.
In case anyone from either of these organizations is watching, no, you don't get a trophy this year. What we will offer you, as we've done before, is our willingness to help you improve how you respond to state and federal transparency laws. FOI Oklahoma is here to help all Oklahomans, including state agencies, better understand and comply with the law. All you have to do is ask. Now, before we go, I want to remind you that Freedom of Information Oklahoma is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we survive on the passion, grit, and generous support of people like you. Whether you're making a one-time donation or joining us as a sustaining member, 100% of your donation goes directly to funding our mission of promoting open and transparent government in Oklahoma. I hope you'll go to our website right now and make a donation at foioklahoma.org/donate.
Thank you for being here, and we sincerely hope to see you all again next year. Have a great day.